Today at the New Indian, we have with us India's former spy chief, Mr. Vikram Sood. Apart from his expertise on espionage, he has written two phenomenal books. One is The Unending Game, in which he revealed how intelligence is gathered, and the other one is The Ultimate Goal, in which he revealed how nations and intelligence agencies construct narratives. Welcome to Reason, the New Indian's platform where we ask questions related to several issues that concern us, only to get to the reason of those issues. Welcome, Mr. Sood.
Thank you for having me on your show.
We will begin with the coronavirus pandemic. Whether it really is a naturally occurring pandemic or it is a man-made virus which was fabricated in a laboratory. What is your take on it?
It's a tough ask because from the look of things, from how it developed, how nations behaved, particularly China, would lend to the obvious conclusion that there is something that is very fishy about the whole thing. Whether the Chinese were just trying to cover themselves up as they are usually doing, or was there something more sinister to it? And strangely, no one really wants to get to the bottom of the whole thing. We're all sort of beating around the bush, we're all making noises, but nobody really wants to or is able to, because the Chinese won't let you investigate. But if you ask me, as an individual with some particular experience, I do think that it was not the intention to create the pandemic perhaps, but the research was for developing a weapon like this, biological. This was perhaps part of a bio-war program. And that went out of hand when it was not really needed, maybe not needed at that time. So I'm sure it's a bio-war weapon, but it's not, that leak may not have been deliberate. I would still give them that benefit of the doubt.
Would you think that this was connected to the US presidential elections?
I haven't looked at it like that seriously. I think this is a dialogue in America that this was done. This is a massive conspiracy hatched to get rid of Trump, but Trump would have gone in any case, it seems. But
in this pandemic, China emerged as the biggest and more effective than any other superpower in the world. Do you think that there was a shift, a disruption in the world order since World War II?
The result of this pandemic is that what you're saying, that it led to the process of a shift of axis from Washington to Beijing. But there is another thing I want to mention. The Americans had held conferences, simulation exercises about a possible pandemic. I think it was World Economic Forum, Bill Gates Foundation, and another university in America, Brown's, I think, I'm not sure, maybe wrong there. They had done a simulation exercise of what would happen if there is a pandemic. And they did almost the same things in their simulation as it actually happened. And then the US government moved a bill to have a special fund allocated for the pandemic. This was in 2019. All this exercise was going on. And the bill was passed only in January 20, when the pandemic had emerged. So, and a government or a state its ability to handle war, let's say, or extraordinary situation is determined by how well they handle internal disruptions like this. Like we handled the tsunami very well. The Americans didn't handle the pandemic well at all. Whether it was political or economic, that can be argued, but they failed. So obviously, the ground from under U.S. foundations had begun to shift. I don't quite know whether the Chinese actually succeeded completely the way they say they do, because it's a closed society. One will never know. So, but they did, perhaps to a large extent, succeed in controlling the pandemic in a much better way than the Europeans or the Americans did. In fact, we did better than the Americans and the Europeans, considering our resources and or the lack of them. So the shift had begun to occur. I would go even earlier than that. The shift had probably started during Obama's time, when they started floundering in Afghanistan. But that wasn't good enough for a major shift to take place.
Can we say that we have arrived at a point where the balance of power has tilted towards China and it has moved away from the US now?
Look at the way the Chinese control the American economy. The amount of funds that they have at their disposal, the trillions of dollars that they hold, the companies that hold American companies. I was told the other day that the Chinese have bought off the biggest pork manufacturing company of the United States. And all the money is theirs. Now they've become the biggest employers of Americans in America in that trade. So bit by bit, they're eating away at the system. And there is a power shift, definitely. Economic, maybe not military yet, but economic, yes.
But what is the use of US being the most powerful country as in terms of military power when the US and China really have not engaged in any military confrontation so far? It's very unlikely that they are going to fight a war, a conventional war.
Well, that's the storyline, that's the narrative. But I don't think they will ever fight each other man to man. There would probably be other ways of doing it. They will probably fight the high-tech war. They'll fight AI wars. They'll do it with hacking and the computer wars. But I don't think they're leaving these kinds of wars to us people. And in the United States, the liaison or the tie-up between the defense industry, the US Congress, Pentagon, think tanks is very tight, very well balanced. So they look forward to a good war. No war means no sales. No sales mean no profit. So who are the biggest gainers in all this last few years? It's the five major defense contractors. The Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, all McDonnell, they're the ones who gain their shares, the profits the most, the sales the most, because uncertainty means everybody wants to buy arms, everybody wants to get ready for whatever. And they have gained the most, and the high-tech companies have gained the most.
So would you say that the war on terror in Afghanistan, which the US fought for 20 years, was a result of the military-industrial complex?
In 2009, when Obama became president, he had announced to the effect that they would withdraw by 2011, that they'd consider the case closed. But it took them 10 years to do it. There was, I believe, intense pressure from the Pentagon and other agencies not to draw down yet, because there were probably contracts in the making, etc., etc. That's one aspect. The other is US is left, despite its military strength, despite its prowess, simply because it had the wrong ally.
Explain for our audience that who was this wrong ally? Why did
Pakistan was fighting its own war. Pakistan was not fighting for Afghanistan. They're not fighting for Islam in Afghanistan per se. Their whole game is India. But this would give them some added security against India. It would give them deniability. You can put your terrorists there and say, I'm not doing anything. Somebody else is doing it. You buy that. And so their game is only us. And we have not understood the ethos behind Pakistan military mindset.
I want to know.
Enmity is the word. Take away that enmity from India, with India, and what are you left?
You're saying that the shift in the world that has happened in the last couple of years, or probably more, where the balance of power has tilted towards China, it is because of Pakistan. Because in the end, the US has lost war, or you can say US has lost its ground in Afghanistan because of Pakistan.
Not so strongly. I mean, USA lost because of its own follies, for its own refusal to read the picture. If you read the picture right, then this wouldn't have happened.
And Pakistan is an important element in that picture, which the US has refused to see.
Refused to see it. If they read it right, this wouldn't have happened. How can you fight against Taliban one day and next day want to protect them? There is a lack of logic in their system that you're fighting terror, but you're not fighting the source of terror. In fact, you're mollycoddling him and he gets bigger and bigger. And there was never any move to sanction Pakistan. Never. Except for the nuclear time. USA sanctions Myanmar for much less reason. Pakistan has been responsible through the Taliban of the killing of Americans. And they never sanctioned it. Why didn't they sanction it? So it's not, Pakistan will play the game that it is allowed to play. USA let it play that game.
So why has there been a reluctance from Washington DC's side to see the picture? Because ultimately they have lost.
That is the $1 million question. Most of us see it. Most of us in America see it. But there is this reluctance to act on this system. You heard of Lara Logan, the Fox person who was saying that the Pakistani system is so well honed into the American system they get what they want.
And it's essentially Pakistan army, right? Because Pakistan...
Marquee doesn't matter in Pakistan. Not, this is the army. Everything is the army. And then they have had this continuity of policy since 1947. One goal.
But isn't it strange that on one side, Pakistan perhaps is the only country in the world today which is an ally of the US and is also an ally of China?
It's a brilliant move.
How is it happening?
I would give them full marks for it. Beg, borrow, or steal, but they've done it. And when we were non-aligned and close to the Soviet Union, we were called a satellite of the Soviet Union by the same Americans. And we were not so close to the Russians or the Soviets as the Pakistanis are to the Chinese, or they were at least on paper with the Americans. Now the Americans say this was an arrangement of necessity. They had to do it. They have to rely on Pakistan. How else can we do it? It was the frontline state for Afghanistan. But I don't know how far that will go or for how long. Because will they again revert to form and find justification for helping Pakistan or for being there? The other thing is, the Americans will find it difficult to leave the region because of Iran. Iran is a problem for them. And they will not be able to just leave Iran without being around somewhere.
So, are you saying that Pakistan is providing that space or base for the US to contain Iran?
I wouldn't put it beyond them. I have no information of that kind that they're doing it. But this thing could be dangled in front of them, or this could be self-justification by the Americans. You make your own arguments and say, I got to be there because of Iran. So I got to be friendly with Pakistan. Because you want to be friends with Pakistan, so you find a reason for being there.
Is the US afraid of Iran?
I am not sure whether they're afraid of Iran, but they fear that Iran is responsible for the terrorism in the Middle East, particularly Israel, and and perhaps sometimes in the Sunni areas also. So they're not afraid. There's also a feeling of wanting to avenge something, that they were thrown out by the Ayatollahs. They had a hold on the Shah of Iran, and they ruled the Gulf because of Iran and Saudi Arabia both in their camp at one stage. So they lost Iran, and then that Operation Desert Storm, or what was it, that failed. So there is, at the hostages that they had taken, there is a psyche been built up inside the United States that these are the worst enemies we've got. But they've not been able to distinguish between an enemy and a friend.
Let's talk about the Muslim world. Until recently, I think the leader of the Muslim world was Saudi Arabia. Is that position still intact, or are we seeing Turkey emerging as a contestant for that position?
I think you may be right, because I also feel that there may be more than one aspirant for that. There could be Pakistan. Because of me, we got the United States away from the region. Because of us, we can now look at them in the eye. And I've got the bomb. So why shouldn't Pakistan qualify as being the leader of the Islamic world? Which Saudis will challenge, which surely the Turks will challenge. And that's how I hope it happens.
Pakistan's economy is in a crisis. We see a lot of dissent within Pakistan. We are seeing Pashtun movement emerging as a very strong movement. We are also seeing Balochistan militant movement against Pakistan army. We are also seeing Barelvis taking the hardline position and trying to be seen as champions of Islamism today. Does Pakistan really qualify, or does Pakistan really have the capacity or ability to contest for that position?
No, I don't think Pakistan has the capacity to look after itself, let alone Afghanistan. So if they think that they're going to manage both countries, they are in for a shock. And yes, there are fissures in Pakistan of the kind you mentioned, and so it does give, it loses points on that if you want to have a contest. And there it loses the point. Saudis are the home of Islam, and they are naturally more qualified to be the leaders of the Islamic world. And the Turks say that we are the most modernized, and we are the original caliphate, so it should come to us. So, of course, Pakistan is least qualified, but Pakistan is also a troublemaker. It's a rogue nation. It's not a normal nation. I mean, no normal nation spends 20 years nursing an insurgency, terrorizing another Muslim nation, and then say, I'm speaking on behalf of the Muslims. You can't be doing both things. You can't be killing Muslims and say, I'm a leader of the Islamic world.
But has Pakistan gained strategic advantage in Afghanistan because of the US withdrawal?
It has gained suzerainty in Afghanistan. It's probably got its own people as holding posts as cabinet ministers and so on and so forth. But it's still early days. How are the rest of the Afghans going to accept a purely Pashtun leadership? And what are they going to do? How are the Pashtuns of Afghanistan going to accept the Durand line? Sooner or later it will come up, the Pakistanis will try to say, "Yeah, now we got our own government, we can have this." But I don't think any Afghan will allow that. And an economy in the state that Pakistan is, and an economy in the state Afghanistan's economy is, it would need more than, much more than Pakistan to put it right. So they don't have the means. So I see more trouble in Afghanistan, which will get into Afghanistan, in Pakistan.
And where do you see India in this entire scenario?
If there had been no Pakistan desire to occupy Taliban, to occupy Afghanistan through the Taliban all these years, since 1970s they've been trying. It's not the Taliban. Their aim has always been, particularly after 1971, to gain strategic depth, which was defined later by General Aslam Beg as the doctrine. They've always looked to find space in Afghanistan as a kind of a security. Remember in the 71 war, they had pushed their aircraft into Iran, Air Force planes for security, so that the Indians don't attack them. So that syndrome continued into Afghanistan. And they were looking for that kind of space. And then the Russians, the Soviets moved in, and you had that conflict. Afghan Mujahideen got created. First time in the history you had, in modern history, you had an Ummah being created, an international Muslim fighting force. Kind courtesy, the US, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. And that has not gone back. When they didn't succeed to get rid of Najibullah in 1990, 93 they began to raise the Taliban. 94 the Taliban entered Afghanistan, occupied, and 96 they had reached Kabul. At that time, the Taliban were a rudimentary force. They were inexperienced. They didn't know anything beyond just killing and sitting in power. They ruled somehow for 5 years, and then 2001 happened. The rest we know. This time, they've had 20 years to prepare. The Taliban of 1996 are now probably daddies, granddaddies. They're all gone. So this is that way Taliban 2.0 is different, but not different in the mindset, not different in its goals, or in terms of cruelty or bigotry. They're the same. So that will continue. What has changed is they are now smarter. They now can handle better weapons. They can handle better weapons better. They still have no experience of governance. They have no experience of administration. Possibly they will borrow from Pakistan to run their government.
What should be India's position on recognizing Taliban officially?
Actually we don't recognize governments. We deal with them. We only recognize countries, strictly speaking. So if there's a new government, you deal with it or you don't deal with it. There's no official letter of recognition that will go to the Taliban. So just start to deal with it. And I don't think we should deal with them. There's no need to arouse them, but we're not interested. Look, at the end of the day, what is that what we're looking for in Afghanistan? It cannot give me anything apart from dry fruit and stuff like that. We're not going to get the copper or lithium, are we? That will go to China. So
Exactly. So the question here
what is it that we are getting by being so anxious about getting into Kabul and sitting there?
Has China gained advantage in Afghanistan?
Just look at the map. On both our land borders, we have two inimical enemies. One is forsworn unto death. The other one just hates us. Both are nuclear. One practices terror on India. Now it's trying to combine Khalistanis and Kashmiris in the West. So they've not given up that game. They're going to move in here into the mainland. not Kashmir alone. Because Kashmir is then automatically gets linked to Pakistan. This way it doesn't. Anyhow, China sits in Afghanistan, China sits in Pakistan. From Afghanistan, it has access to Turkmenistan, second access, and it has access to Iran. It has access to the Persian Gulf, one there and one in Gwadar. So it's sitting on two bases, perspective two bases in the Middle East. And it has got its um, BRI going. So for the big game, they're ready. Who was it who said to some Roman emperor, when you want to build an empire, build roads? So that's what they've been doing. They're ahead of us.
Are we saying that India is cornered today?
No, itna to nahi bura. We're not so. We have our own intrinsic strengths. We are 1.3 billion pretty smart people. We have some crazy differences, but on the whole, we are smart people. We are diligent, we are hardworking, we have a strong army, we have strong values. It's not easy to ignore India. And if we get our economy going, they will all come to you. Believe you me. The whole game is economics. Modi is disliked not because of Hindutva, that's the narrative. He is disliked because he's got his policies which are nationalistic. Atmanirbharta and Make in India. The chap in California is wondering if this guy is going to make his own computers and systems, what am I going to sell? If he's going to be a 1.3 billion people with X number of phones and systems and products, where am I going? As it is, they've lost out to China. They can't afford to lose out on India. They can't afford to have two big economies in Asia which will overturn the Western system.
Can we say that India is an ally of the US today? Or can we say that India is an ally of China today?
I think we are where we were before. We're not allied to anyone.
Are we still non-aligned?
I think we're non-aligned as a concept is dead, but we probably, we're not neutral. I think it's undefined. We want to be friends with everybody. We want to take the goodies out of everybody.
Except for Pakistan.
Except for Pakistan.
And can we say that China has finally emerged as the biggest superpower of the world?
China is on its way.
Does that mean the new world order is here?
Not just, it's not economic might alone, it's not just military power alone that determines your status. How are you thought of in the world? How many of us will stand in queues for a visa to China or to send our children to study in Shanghai or some other university or to Russia? So that gap is immense. That social, cultural gap is immense. We can't relate to China. We can, at least you and I, we can relate to America much more easily than we can to China. So that takes a lot of doing. Acceptability is required. United States, Britain, France, all these countries are acceptable in a way, as a kind of a way of life. But China isn't. I mean, we still feel very...
Is democracy the key here?
Well, democracy is also a slogan. After all, when the United States was fighting its Cold War against the Soviet Union, among their allies were 65 dictators, and they were all fighting for democracy. The irony of it, that so democracy is good. It's definitely a better way of living than living in a totalitarian state. But some would say that that is the state that delivered. Chinese system delivered its international status today because of its system, because of its totalitarian way of life.
So can we now say that the new world order has emerged and it's the Chinese way?
No, I don't think the new world order will be the Chinese way. It will still come back to us.
To India?
Yeah. to the world that thinks that there has to be individual freedom.
So that is the Western world.
Yeah. The West will have to make adjustments. It's no longer on top of the hill. You know, when you reach a pinnacle, when you reach a top, there's only one way you can go. You can only go down. So if you can retain that position, that is good enough. Because there are other climbers on the hill. And that's where the US made that mistake. They thought they were there forever.
So, in this scenario, where do you see the significance or the relevance of Quad?
Quad is not NATO. So it has no firepower. Therefore, if there is an India-China war, nobody is going to come to us on that ground. We know it, the Americans know it, the Chinese know it. At most, you can see it trying to restrict Chinese activities up to a point. I don't see it doing anything much more than that. Unless you have military teeth, you can do exercises together, that doesn't matter. But there's no military alliance. And as is, we don't sign military alliances. So, Quad is good, but it's not good for nothing, but it's good.
Mr. Sood, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. It was a pleasure to have you on our platform.
Thank you, Aarti, for having me on this program. And I end by saying that I enjoyed talking to you, as always. And I also look forward to the rise of the new Indian. And wishing you all the best, because this is a very, very important step you have taken.